What do most Fortune 500 executives have in common? They learned important lessons on the fields and courts of their high school and collegiate sports teams. This is true for both men and women. Ernst & Young found that a whopping 94% of women holding a C-suite position played sports. Their wins and losses shaped their habits and who they would become. Join me on my journey to sit with some of the brightest executives in the world as we discuss how sports shape their professional trajectory. In partnership with Chief Executive Magazine, the voice of America's CEO community, I'm your host, Don Yeager, and this is Corporate Competitor Podcast. With me for today's episode is Andy Wiederhorn, President and CEO of Fat Brands, Inc., a global franchising company that acquires, markets, develops fast casual, quick service, casual dining, and even polished casual dining concepts around the world. Andy made his first restaurant acquisition in 2003 with Fatburger, when the brand had only 40 restaurants. And since then, Fat Brands, Inc. has acquired brands you know and love, like Johnny Rockets, Fazoli's, Native Grill and Wings, and now they have 17 brands spanning 40 countries with 2,300 restaurants. I'm excited to learn about the role competition played in his leadership journey.
Always to try to hit singles and doubles. Don't try to hit home runs. I always try to figure out, how do I get on to first base? How do I move from first to second and second to third and so on? But don't try to swing for the fences. It's not an effective way. It's like trying to only be a three-point shooter in basketball. Don't try to hit home runs. The home runs will come on their own when you get the right shot.
Andy, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
I am fascinated as I was looking and reading, studying, preparing to be with you. I'm going to assume that today we're going to have a master class in blending company cultures. When you look at all the cultures that you have added into your company, it's going to be a master class in mergers and acquisitions. I saw that in 2003, you bought Fatburger. At the time, there were 40 restaurants. Today, Fat Brands, representing many of the companies you have behind you there, and 2,300 restaurants across 40 countries. Do you ever wake up and kind of pinch yourself when you look at that number and you think about how massive the accumulation of restaurants has become?
It's certainly been very exciting to build this company into what's probably now the 25th largest restaurant company in the country. I didn't start out thinking that we were going to own 2,300 restaurants back 20 years ago. And, we have another 875 to be developed.
Wow.
That's right. Paid for by franchisees that have development schedules ready to go to build more restaurants in the coming years. So that's probably 150 a year, something like that. I'm very happy with the growth and the execution of our team members and how this has come together. But, you never plan it that far away. It's kind of like planning a home run or a hole in one.
150 a year, 3 a week. That's got to be mind-blowing. Is there anything you wish today that you had known 2,300 restaurants ago?
Well, for sure, being the franchisor and focusing on a franchise business is really what I wish I had learned 20 years ago. When I bought Fatburger, the first brand we acquired, there were 40 restaurants, like you said. Half were franchise, half were corporate. And we continued to develop lots of corporate stores. And it's just really hard to be an operator of restaurants and be the franchisor at the same time. When we went through the financial crisis in 2007, 8, 9, if you remember, being a franchisor and supporting the franchisees through this crisis is really where our focus should be. Trying to worry about our own individual stores and all the things that we had to do to firefight. It's sort of like going through COVID. As a franchisor, we were able to coach our franchisees significantly to help them with all the things they had to do and deal with, staffing and restrictions and what have you. That's where I really had that aha moment and said, geez, focusing on the franchisee, making sure that they make money, that they develop new restaurants. It's a better focus than trying to do both at the same time. We were just able to execute so much better coaching them than just running our own stores. We just had so much advice to give that was very helpful to them. And that was something we figured out a long time ago. I wish I knew that 20 years ago, but I certainly know it now.
You mentioned COVID. So these last couple of years, tough on the entire industry. I mean, there isn't anyone I've worked with or talked to in that space that hasn't struggled both in how you handle customers, how you handle the ability to make sure that you can staff appropriately. But you took a huge jump in 2021 when Fat Brands acquired Global Franchise Group for $442 million. Dollars. It was the largest restaurant acquisition of the year, tripling your company's number of units and revenue. I've studied successful teams in the past and organizations. I even had the chance to author a book on great teams. One of the things about a great team is being able to pull cultures together and create some kind of a unified sense of who we serve. How do you do that when you have that many different brands? Is there an individual culture for each one? How do you, as the leader of all, think through culture and your organizations?
So I run our business on a results driven basis. I really want to see results that we set out to achieve and to make sure we do that. It's sort of easy in the sense that when we look at our business today, it's about the guest experience and the customer experience. In my business, the customer is really the franchisee. That's the person who pays us a royalty every week. And we want to make sure that they're successful running their businesses. And of course, we want the guy eating the hamburger or the chicken wings or ice cream or pizza or whatever to have a good time. But I really want to make sure that our customer, the franchisee, is making money and they understand how to run their business and that we're coaching them properly. So I try to motivate the team to remember who the customer is, just like remember who your audience is when you're on stage. Who are you communicating to? What's the message? And that's really been my approach to culturally making things work. Sometimes there's synergy plays, and sometimes it's about leaving management teams alone to let them run their own businesses. That's at the brand level and depending on which brand it is.
So it sounds like in many ways you're just a massive coaching organization disguised as a restaurant chain.
I mean, that's true. I mean, when you think about it, we have 800 different franchisees, about half of which are multi-unit operators. So they operate anything from 2 to 50 restaurants, and then the rest are mom and pops. And you got to be giving them advice, at their level. If it's a mom and pop, it's different advice than a multi-unit operator that may not need as much help in one area or another, or you may need to push them a little bit to reinvest capital and things like that in their business. You just have to be mindful when you make decisions that you're affecting people's lives. And so when you're coaching, you can't just have blinders on. You need to think about what's the effect of what you're asking someone to do.
I love that. Give those that you're serving advice to their level. Doesn't do you any good to give mom and pop the same advice you would give someone that's running 50 franchises. You need to be looking at each one of them. In order to do that, you have to know them, those you're serving.
Absolutely. I mean, it's really important to have a dialogue and a relationship on a regular basis with your customer. You need to know what it is they want and what they don't like. And you can't just make broad brush statements or send memos or do whatever. You're going to get an eye roll back and people aren't going to comply, or it's going to be nothing but a battle. And you don't want that. You want it to be a constructive relationship, because if they're successful, if they're making money and their business is working right, they're going to build more restaurants and pay us more royalties. I mean, we all win that way. And if they're not successful, we know exactly what's going to happen. They're going to go out of business. So it's really important to control your messaging to your audience and make sure that you're addressing it in a constructive way to get what needs to be done, but to help them. And you're coaching them.
As you're bringing on a new brand, adding them to your family, if you would, give me something about the process that helps make the transition smoother for someone that's probably feeling even a little uncertain. They're joining an organization different than where they started. How are you making transitions smoother for others who are coming on board?
Well, you try to do your homework up front and try to evaluate the organization that you're acquiring and figuring out how is that going to merge into Fat Brands. Our brand stands for fresh, authentic, tasty brands. So we're always looking for brands that have good food. Then you're trying to look at the team members and say, is this a synergies play? Are we going to have duplication of efforts here and there's cost savings as part of the acquisition? Or are these management teams independent and they've got growth behind them and we should let them go and grow their own brands and coach them to adapt to our way of doing things to the extent that that makes sense, but really let them get their stores open and really execute on that growth. You sort of look at both those things and you plan ahead. And then we end up having a 30, 60, 90-day process of introducing ourselves to the franchisees, assessing the brand that we're acquiring, what are the strengths and weaknesses, and coming up with a plan to solve any issues you need to solve, capitalize on the strengths, try to build some foundation under the weaknesses and turn it around and make decisions as quickly as you can.
I'm speaking to you today. You're on a tour, visiting several of your restaurants. As you're moving from one to the next, how are you keeping them aware of global direction? How challenging is that? You've got so much going on. How much transparency do you try to offer to each one of these individual places?
everything's different brand by brand. So you have to be mindful of that. But look, the restaurant business is the restaurant business. It's all about your employees and making sure they feel part of the brand and part of the culture. And you really have to appreciate your employees. And there's just no shortage of what you can do and how you can communicate. You want to get to know the employees. You want to ask that manager, you want to ask that server about their personal life and let them know you care a little bit. And that's how they engage. And just like you want them to engage with the customer, not in a bothersome way, but in a way to have some connectivity so that they care about the job they're doing. I try to communicate what's our vision as a business, as a company, and then what's their job and their role in the hospitality industry. They're common themes. It's connecting with the guest, it's connecting with the employee, or connecting with the franchisee. There's got to be some interaction, some relationship, because people are your number one resource always. Whether that's at a Twin Peaks or that's at a Fatburger or a Round Table Pizza or anything else, it's all about the people.
So you get the rare opportunity to truly experience all about the people in that you were on Undercover Boss. You're actually, ironically, the third of our guests who have been featured on Undercover Boss in the past. We had Joel Manby from SeaWorld in episode 77. We had Brandon Landry in our episode 39. They talked about how that experience was wonderfully foundational. Tell me about that experience in this effort as an executive, as a leader to get to know people. What was it like to go that deep?
It was a fascinating experience because you really got to understand how underappreciated the employees at the franchise locations were feeling, and even how there were personal problems at the bakery. I was working with one of the guys running the bakery, and I was learning about his wife who had some immigration issues, the experience they were going through trying to get her papers squared away and everything. When you see how an employee wants to be appreciated, they want to work hard, they want to do their job, they want to excel, they want to be recognized though, and they want to be appreciated that they've stepped up to do things. Getting feedback from your team members is critical, and they have to feel that if they have something to say, they can say it without feeling they're going to be criticized somehow.
Right.
It's really foundationally about having a connection with your employees at all levels whenever you interact with them, so that there's some identification that, hey, he cares about me or she cares about me. And there's some feedback and there's some connection about your personal life or other things that are important to that employee, not just going through the motions of talking about the job or the business meeting or whatever it is. It's really about having that connection, because once your employee or your franchisee or your customer feels that you have some sort of a connection, now you've got an entirely different relationship to build upon going forward.
Mm.
Some of the employees talked to me about problems they had with their franchise owners. And you have to recognize the franchise owner is a small business operator. They've got their own issues to deal with, but they've got to understand how to communicate with their employees and how to build that relationship and appreciate them. I'm always thinking of the franchisee as my customer, but franchisees got to be thinking about the employees in their restaurants, and are they connecting with them? Otherwise, there's a disconnect in that message between what we might coach them on at corporate and how do they then coach their employees. If they don't have a relationship, they're not going to get that message across, or the employee's not going to listen. You're the operator, you've got your own problems. It could be cash flow, it could be sales, it could be labor, it could be supply chain, whatever. But your employee is part of your team. They're part of your family, and you've got to appreciate them and let them know that. And then they'll go through the fight with you. They'll be in the trenches with you.
When you're talking about you want your franchisees to know maybe a better way to communicate with some of these employees, when you've got an organization as massive as yours, how do you keep people feeling heard?
I make sure that everyone in our senior management team gets every single customer complaint in real time on their phones or their mobile devices or on their computers. It's not that one customer has a bad experience somewhere and you hear about it, but you're looking for trends. Did you get multiple complaints about something in a place? Now you know you got a problem you've got to look into. I want our team members to have their finger on the pulse of what's going on in our business in the restaurants. And that's getting feedback from employees, getting feedback from customers, and interacting with them. You got to do all three of those things to have a stool that stands up.
I love that idea of actually trying to find ways to draw that feedback in. We love to say around our office that feedback is the breakfast of champions. So tell me, let's say I'm running a smaller organization, a smaller operation. I don't have the ability to establish a 1-800 hotline. What are some creative ways that you've seen or that you've imagined with your team to get that kind of feedback that maybe someone listening today might be able to use?
There's certainly the old-fashioned way, which is the old suggestion box. Write it on a piece of paper, drop it in the box, and away you go. You can do it through web-based applications. where they can go to a portal, they can make their comments or their ideas. And that's separate from an email address to send thoughts to or a text message number to send thoughts to. So we've used all those different things. The web-based portal is the easiest because you can log on, make your comment, log off. It's completely anonymous if you want it to be. Not every comment or idea people want to be anonymous. Sometimes they want credit for coming up with an idea. So they're not afraid to share it. They just want to know where to send it and who's going to look at it and is it going to get to the right person. You just need to figure out the logistics more than anything. And then you can decide whether or not it has to be anonymous. That's almost a secondary issue.
The key is committing yourself to soliciting and then doing something with it, letting people know this isn't just flying into the atmosphere and nothing ever gets done as a result.
That's 100% right.
So you live in California today, but I know you grew up in Portland, Oregon, a great running community, and have always been competitive. In fact, you have 6 children and their competitions are a big part of your life today. My favorite word in the English language is the word compete. I think it's an honor to compete every day. What does the word compete mean to you?
Competition has all kinds of different meanings in terms of where you are in life and what you're trying to achieve. I want to see people be successful. I want to see my children be successful. Everyone wants that. Yet they've got to earn it on their own. It's very rewarding, of course, to see your children succeed and grow and mature and all of those things. But you also learn that they're still siblings. What's so funny is how siblings can argue or fight with each other like there's no one in the room, but in a business setting, you certainly don't want to see that happen. So I learned early on to give them very different responsibilities so they could compete on their own. They could be held accountable for their own achievements or failures and not be able to, point the finger at the other guy and say, oh, no, it wasn't me, it was him. And by quickly having one person do something and someone else do something completely different, it's very easy to measure their performance. And then they didn't feel like my sibling screwing this up for me. Instead, it's, hey, I'm on my own here. I better figure this out.
Yeah.
Competing to me really means that you've got to earn it yourself. It's not because of your last name. It's because you've got to go out and do the work. And in fact, if you have the same last name, you may have to work even harder than someone else who doesn't just to prove that you're doing the job. Competing there is really earning it yourself. You're an individual athlete. Even if you're on a team, you've got to earn everyone's respect and you've got to play your role better than anyone else. And that's really the message that I try to send to my kids.
You enjoy even today playing tennis and skiing. Tell me, as somebody who does enjoy sports, something you've learned through the competitive aspect of sports that's helped make you a better leader.
My view of how to be successful is always to try to hit singles and doubles. Don't try to hit home runs. The home runs will come on their own when you get the right shot. I always try to figure out, how do I get on to first base? How do I move from first to second and second to third and so on? But don't try to swing for the fences. It's not an effective way. It's like trying to only be a 3-point shooter in basketball. You got to make your free throws. You got to make your layups. You got to play with the other team members. You can't do it all yourself from the 3-point line.
I love it. Although I have to tell you, here we are talking about you spending $1 billion in 2021 on franchise acquisition. I'm thinking there's some home run hitting in spending $1 billion.
We were very fortunate during the pandemic. It was time to go hunting instead of getting hunted. And there were some gutsy acquisitions here before there was a vaccine, before you saw the backside of the pandemic. This is a long-term decision, not a short-term decision. The pandemic is here for the short term. These brands have been around for years and they are growth brands and there's opportunity there. It was important to scale this business. And that's something that we did and we took advantage of. And we made some great acquisitions, some great brands, and so fortunate to have made those. And now, we've got to digest them. We've got a lot of work ahead to prove that this strategy has worked and that these brands can be developed. But the fact that we've sold another 875 stores and franchisees are very engaged is very encouraging. And I'm looking forward to showing that growth.
What I love about that is that in order to be able to be in a position to make that choice, to decide, I want to be a hunter, I don't want to be hunted, you had to have had the capacity and the financial wherewithal to be able to do that. It's easy to say, I want to go out hunting during this period. But if you haven't done the right things previously, if you haven't set aside reserves, if you hadn't done what I'm going to assume were principles for you, that you wouldn't have been capable in those moments.
It took a long time to get this platform ready to make those kind of acquisitions, to have the capital available, to get the financing in place. It took me several years after going public to get that lined up properly. I wish we could have accomplished it sooner, but we did. And when it was in place, we went shopping opportunities that made sense for us. Nobody ever writes about or talks about the 10 deals we turned down for every one deal we do. We just recently passed on a giant acquisition. It could have been $500-600 million also. 500 or 600 restaurants. Half were company-owned stores, and that means they're not all franchised or even close to being all franchised. And that's just a business that I don't think we want to be in. I ultimately decided, while there's a franchise opportunity and a growth opportunity here, it's just going to be a distraction to my team to be working on all those company-owned stores instead of be supporting the franchisees. I think it was the right decision. I just don't think we were the right organization to make that acquisition. And someone who did, I think, was better at it, and I'm glad they got it.
Mm.
We looked at more than 100 transactions, but we did a dozen brands. The best deals you ever do are the ones you don't do because they're just too problematic. I've made plenty of mistakes, and I've been knocked down on the canvas plenty of times, and you have to pick yourself up and get back in the ring and keep going.
What a great point. Great teams, as a lot of study has shown, have a roadmap. They know where they're headed toward. You understood that with that many company-owned stores, it was going to be distracting to you, would have taken you away from the true north you were designed for.
100%.
I love it. By the way, I have to ask you because I spent last night at a scout meeting with my son. You're an Eagle Scout?
I am an Eagle Scout. 3 of my sons are Eagle Scouts, and it was a great experience to go through with them. Yes.
We talked a lot about the value of sports into teaching and developing leadership. Give me a plug for Scouts.
Scouting is just a great experience to teach young men how to become leaders because you're sort of forced into that as you go through the different ranks and get the achievements. I remember trying to incentivize my boys when they were going through scouting to get their Eagle Scouts. And I promised them, like, look, after you become an Eagle Scout, I'll get you a car.
Boy.
You can't get a car unless you complete scouting and become an Eagle Scout. And you can't quit. So if you go all the way through and you don't finish advancing to the top ranks and earning your Eagle Scout, then you've spent all this time at it and you didn't finish. And it was interesting because about halfway through, I said to one of my sons, hey, what's the car that you want to try to get here? Be reasonable. He looked at me and said, Dad, I don't care about the car. I just want to finish this. I started this thing and I'm halfway through it. I want to get it done.
Wow.
And that was, a crystallizing moment of a sense of achievement. Hey, I put all this work into this. I want to finish it. That's what's most important to me, which was a great lesson to learn.
It wasn't the reward at the end. It was the journey.
Absolutely. Yeah. The accomplishment, sense of accomplishment.
I know several of your children are actually in the company with you now. You're almost building a legacy organization here, it seems. You mentioned earlier, sometimes having the same last name can work to your detriment. How do you make sure that they're doing everything that's required for them and not getting a pass in some way because they share the last name? I think everyone that's ever brought a family member into their organization has worried that you want to do right by your family member, but you also want to make sure that they're doing right by the business. How do you draw that line?
Well, I mean, I think there's 2 things you can do. One is try to encourage the rest of your team members to be very open and critical, just like anybody else. If they're not delivering for you, you need to speak up because each of the other team members are going to be accountable for their responsibilities in the organization. And if one of my family members is letting them down, they better speak up because it's going to affect their performance and how I look at it. You don't have to lead with a stick versus a carrot. It's really trying to encourage everybody to do the things that they love to do and work hard at them. And when people are passionate about things, so you find the right position for them to play, then it's pretty easy. They do it on their own. And, it's not really me checking on them or cracking the whip as much as I'm looking for results. And so you either achieve the results or you don't, black and white.
A real key tenet of what you said there is you've got to create an atmosphere within the organization where non-family members can speak up and feel as if they're not at risk if they were to mention something. And that's a real challenge from those who I've worked with in the past, just trying to understand how they can develop that sense of an open forum.
We have very, very opinionated discussions within the organization, and a lot of people have a lot of opinions. And I encourage everyone to push back and give us their feedback, give us their advice, tell us what's on their mind about a particular topic. I'll consider it. I love to consider lots of opinions and try to understand where people are coming from. But once the decision's made, it's made. We'll ferret that out. We'll listen to everything, and then I'll make whatever decision I need to make. And then everybody's got to get behind it, and we got to move on because we can't have it be a cancer that's running through the organization where people are undermining something because we want to do an initiative and not everybody's on board with it. It's really like, let's thoroughly vet the ideas ahead of time. Push back as much as you need to. No one's going to cut your head off for that. But then when we make a decision, we make a decision.
Give me a listening tip for that. How do you, as a leader of something as broad and massive as Fat Brands, how do you not let your opinion affect the way others are sharing opinions with you?
You can't learn anything by talking, right? We all know that. So you got to listen. You got to remind yourself of that over and over again, that you've got to listen. Otherwise, you're not going to hear what the other party's saying. When you're going to give some feedback to someone about what their idea is, you need to be mindful about where that's coming from and how that's based. You've got to be considerate.
We ask this question of almost every guest. One of the most overused words that I've encountered over the years in the corporate world is the word teams. It's me and my team. The truth is, most organizations are not built as we would define a team. They're a bunch of independent actors who just happen to have the same business card. As you're building the teams for your brands, as you're building the teams for your organization, what advice can you give us to draw out individual contributors and get them to pull together in one direction?
It's very important to let people express themselves and express their ideas and then execute them. So again, you've got to vet the plan and then give them a roadmap to be measured for success. You can't just make it touchy-feely. You really have to be able to objectively measure if something worked or didn't work and be honest about it. And I think that you set those expectations early on with whatever the person or the team member is. So there's no misunderstanding. No one wants a misunderstanding or different objectives that you thought you had, trying to accomplish something. And then your boss says, oh, that isn't even what we wanted. You missed the mark by a mile. Like, how can that happen? If you don't set clear objectives, you're going to have failure and hurt feelings.
I love that. Giving them not just a roadmap, but check-in points or how you're going to measure them and define success for them along the way. Really important. We also both know change is inevitable. You went through it. Obviously, we all did the last couple of years, and your industry hit as hard as any through COVID. But it's going to happen whether you plan for it or not. The best teams embrace change, like they know it's coming. How do you do that in your business in preparation for those you serve, your franchisees?
Well, look, you worry a lot. I worry all the time about everything. That's just the nature of, being a leader. You're always trying to be thoughtful about what could go wrong at any stage or at any place, and how can you be prepared for that. That's important with your teams, is to coach them on that so that they're not just whistling past the graveyard and forgetting that, hey, something could happen to you. What could go wrong in your business that you weren't planning on? And think about that and have contingency plans for that. Look, you want them to be innovative and try to adapt, and what's going to work, what's going to move the needle. Also, don't do things that aren't going to move the needle. Focus on the things that matter, whether that's 2 things, 3 things, 4 things, whatever it is. Come up with that hot list of things that are going to make a difference and run them up the flagpole as quick as you can, or talk to whoever you need to talk to in your constituency base to figure out if you can execute. Because if you can, you may save the day.
Right.
How many people had contingency plans for the pandemic, right? No one thought that would happen. You'd have restaurants closed, right? It's nuts. But it did happen, and people had to adapt quickly, and you have to be flexible. And being able to pivot is important. And I think that that's something you coach your senior management members to coach their staff, is be ready to pivot. You have to be flexible and be thoughtful.
I've spent a 30-year career in journalism, asking great coaches, a lot of great athletes. Most of my work has been in sports, as you know. If you can identify one habit that you built into your daily routine, a habit that you think helped you in some great way, something that gave you an advantage over competitors, what would that habit be in Andy's life?
For me, I think it's keeping things in perspective. If you're competing in a race, focus on the race. If you're competing to get from one base to another base, to get the ball across the net, to get down the ski slope, you really need to focus on the things that you can make a difference doing yourself right now, right in front of you, not worrying about the things that are down the road or around the corner, things that you can't change. That advice is advice that I try to give to our team members. Let's focus on what you can do about this problem. Don't worry about the things you can't do about it. Those problems will be there anyway.
And to stay present, because that's how you make sure that you're not thinking too far down the road. You need some vision, but staying present allows you to do exactly that.
Absolutely.
Andy, how can those that are listening today best connect with you, Fat Brands, the 2,300 restaurants? How can we continue to learn and grow from you?
We're always communicating with everyone about what's going on at Fat Brands, and certainly in management. We're accessible by contact@fatbrands.com. People can email things to us, but also we're always publishing our thoughts and initiatives on our websites and on our brand pages and through social media. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to follow us and understand what's going on at Fat Brands. And I really appreciate all the constructive suggestions that we get as well.
Andy, I appreciate the time today. I appreciate the effort you went through to make this interview happen. And I love the growth. Big fan of Johnny Rockets, by the way, as was my father-in-law. So I want to just thank you today for being a corporate competitor.
Oh, thank you. You're very welcome. And I appreciate you having me.
I cannot wait to re-listen to this conversation the next time I'm at a Johnny Rockets. I'll be locked in a booth listening trying to make sure I take even better notes. The notes that I did take, the greatest takeaways from today's conversation, really came down to how we as leaders are seeking wisdom from those we serve, whether it's our employees or our customers. But then, most importantly, and I love this piece he learned through his work on Undercover Boss, Andy made sure that there was a structure in place where those ideas were activated upon, and that those who suggested them saw the good work that came from their suggestions. If you like this topic and you want to learn more about generating creative ideas, check out episode 85 with Savannah Bananas owner Jesse Cole. If you could share one habit, one thing you've done consistently that allowed you to separate yourself from your competitors, what would it be? In my 30-year career, 2,500 of the greatest athletes, coaches, and leaders answered that question for me.
This is Don Yeager, who did that that article I was telling you about.
Don, Dave Sims with Coach K. How you doing?
Hey, Don. How you doing, my man? Great, sir.
What they gave to me is what I'm giving to you in my online course, Journey to Greatness. Through engaging storytelling and on-demand videos, you will learn the 16 habits that will jumpstart your personal growth. I will instruct you on how to apply these winning characteristics to your life through custom workbook exercises. We are slashing the price for our podcast listeners. Lifetime access to Journey to Greatness is normally $399, but for our podcast listeners, it will be $49 with the code podcast at checkout. Click the banner on corporatecompetitorpodcast.com to enroll. Thanks for listening to the show. I would be so grateful if you left us a rating and a review. We will be rolling out a new episode every Wednesday. To be the first to listen, subscribe to the podcast on our website, corporatecompetitorpodcast.com. Plus, as a thank you gift, you will receive a free chapter from one of my best-selling books on the habits of high-performing teams. Stay in touch by connecting with me on social media at Don Yeager, Yaeger, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Until next week, I appreciate you.